If you've ever looked down at your midsection and thought, why is this weight so stubborn? You're not alone. And here's the part most people don't realize. The most dangerous fat in your body isn't the kind you can pinch. It's the fat you can't see. It's called visceral fat. And unlike the soft fat that sits just under your skin, visceral fat wraps itself deep around your internal organs, your liver, your pancreas, your intestines. It behaves less like stored energy and more like an active organ, pumping out inflammatory chemicals and hormones that quietly disrupt your metabolism. This is where it gets fascinating. Visceral fat doesn't just make your pants tighter, it interferes with insulin, it raises blood sugar, it increases your risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and even cognitive decline. Researchers from major institutions like Harvard have described it as metabolically dangerous for a reason. It actively works against your body. And after age 50, your body becomes especially prone to storing this kind of fat. Hormonal shifts, slower muscle turnover, and years of accumulated insulin spikes make your belly the easiest storage site. But here's the hopeful part. Visceral fat is also one of the most responsive types of fat to the right nutritional signals. When you give your body the correct metabolic message, it can begin to release this deep inflammatory fat surprisingly quickly. And in today's video, I'm going to show you the specific food that helps send that message. Now, before we talk about the specific food that helps burn visceral fat, we need to understand the real roadblock. And that roadblock is insulin resistance. If you've ever felt like you're eating less, but gaining more, or doing everything right, yet your belly fat refuses to budge, insulin may be the hidden reason. Insulin is a hormone released by your pancreas. Its job sounds simple. Move sugar from your bloodstream into your cells so it can be used for energy. But when insulin levels stay elevated for years, often from frequent snacking, refined carbohydrates, sugary drinks, or even chronic stress, your cells begin to stop responding properly. This is insulin resistance. Here's where it gets frustrating. When your cells resist insulin, your body produces even more of it to compensate. And high insulin levels send a very specific message to your body. Store fat. Not burn it, store it. Even worse, insulin is particularly skilled at directing fat storage into the abdominal cavity, right where visceral fat accumulates. So you can walk every day, count calories, cut portions, and still struggle because hormonally, your body is locked in fat storage mode. Researchers at institutions like the Mayo Clinic have emphasized that insulin resistance often develops silently for years before blood sugar levels officially rise into diabetic range. That means many adults over 50 are already metabolically compromised without realizing it. And here's something most people overlook. Insulin resistance doesn't just make weight loss harder. It increases inflammation, raises triglycerides, disrupts hunger hormones, and makes cravings more intense. It becomes a cycle. Higher insulin, more fat storage, greater resistance. But the encouraging news is this. Insulin sensitivity can improve, and certain foods have a remarkable ability to help lower insulin levels, stabilize blood sugar, and signal your body to release stored visceral fat instead of clinging to it. And that brings us to the breakthrough food most people underestimate. So what is the food that helps your body burn visceral fat and improve insulin sensitivity at the same time? Extra virgin olive oil. Now I know what you might be thinking. Oil for weight loss? This might sound simple, but the science is remarkable. Extra virgin olive oil, the kind that's cold pressed, unrefined, and rich in polyphenols, has been studied extensively in metabolic health research, especially in Mediterranean populations, where rates of heart disease and metabolic syndrome are significantly lower. But the real surprise was this. It doesn't just support heart health, it directly influences how your body stores and burns fat. The key lies in its unique combination of monounsaturated fats and powerful plant compounds called polyphenols. These compounds reduce inflammation inside fat tissue, particularly visceral fat, and improve how your cells respond to insulin. Researchers studying the Mediterranean diet pattern have consistently found reductions in waist circumference and improvements in insulin sensitivity when extra virgin olive oil is used as the primary fat source. And this isn't about eating less food. In many of these studies, participants weren't even restricting calories, yet their abdominal fat decreased. Here's what's happening behind the scenes. When you consume high-quality extra virgin olive oil, it slows digestion just enough to prevent sharp blood sugar spikes. That means lower insulin release. Lower insulin allows your body to access stored fat, especially the deep abdominal fat that thrives in high insulin environments. At the same time, olive oil's polyphenols help calm the inflammatory signals coming from visceral fat tissue. And remember, visceral fat behaves like an inflammatory organ. Reduce the inflammation and you reduce its grip on your metabolism. Even more fascinating, Olive oil appears to support mitochondrial function, essentially helping your cells burn fuel more efficiently instead of storing it. But not all olive oils are created equal. The processing matters, the freshness matters, the polyphenol content matters, and in the next section, I'll explain exactly how this food reprograms your metabolism at a cellular level, and why it works so well, especially after 50. Now let's go deeper, because this is where it gets truly fascinating. Extra virgin olive oil doesn't just help weight loss in a general sense. It actively shifts the internal signals that determine whether your body stores fat or burns it. First, let's talk about inflammation. Visceral fat is metabolically active tissue. It releases inflammatory compounds called cytokines that interfere with insulin signaling. When inflammation rises, insulin resistance worsens. And when insulin resistance worsens, fat storage increases. It's a vicious loop. The polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil, particularly oleocanthal and hydroxytyrosol, have been shown in research to act almost like natural anti-inflammatory agents. Some scientists have even compared oleocanthal's effects to mild ibuprofen-like activity inside the body. By calming inflammatory pathways, olive oil helps restore clearer communication between insulin and your cells, but that's only part of the story. Olive oil is rich in monounsaturated fat, especially oleic acid. Unlike refined vegetable oils, which can promote oxidative stress, oleic acid integrates into your cell membranes and improves their fluidity. Think of it as oiling a rusty hinge. When your cell membranes function better, insulin receptors respond more efficiently. That means lower insulin levels are required to move sugar out of your bloodstream. Lower insulin levels equal greater access to stored fat. Here's another mechanism most people overlook. Fat oxidation. Studies examining Mediterranean dietary patterns have shown increased expression of genes involved in fat burning when olive oil is a primary fat source. In simple terms, your metabolic machinery becomes more comfortable using fat as fuel instead of defaulting to glucose. And there's something even more interesting. Olive oil supports gut health. Its polyphenols act as prebiotics, feeding beneficial gut bacteria. And healthier gut bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids that improve insulin sensitivity and reduce abdominal fat accumulation. The gut metabolism connection is powerful, especially as we age. After 50, mitochondrial efficiency naturally declines. That means your cells don't convert fuel into energy as effectively. Olive oil's antioxidant compounds help protect mitochondria from oxidative damage, preserving their ability to burn fat. So when you consistently consume high-quality extra virgin olive oil, you're not simply adding calories. You're sending metabolic instructions: reduce inflammation, lower insulin, improve cellular sensitivity, burn stored fat. And the research supporting these effects is stronger than most people realize. In the next section, I'll walk you through the science and the measurable changes researchers have documented in visceral fat and insulin markers. Now let's talk about evidence, because none of this matters unless it holds up under real scientific scrutiny. One of the most compelling bodies of research comes from large Mediterranean diet trials conducted in Europe, including the well-known Preventive study. In this landmark clinical trial, thousands of participants at high cardiovascular risk were assigned to a Mediterranean diet supplemented with either extra virgin olive oil or nuts, compared to a lower fat control diet. What surprised researchers wasn't just the reduction in heart attacks and strokes. It was the measurable improvement in waist circumference, insulin sensitivity, and markers of metabolic syndrome, even when total calorie intake wasn't dramatically reduced. Participants consuming higher amounts of extra virgin olive oil showed better blood sugar control and lower fasting insulin levels. That's critical, because as we discussed earlier, high fasting insulin is one of the strongest drivers of visceral fat accumulation. Researchers analyzing abdominal fat distribution in Mediterranean populations have consistently found lower levels of central obesity compared to Western dietary patterns heavy in refined carbohydrates and industrial seed oils. Institutions like Harvard School of Public Health have published findings suggesting that replacing saturated fats and refined carbohydrates with monounsaturated fats, particularly from olive oil, improves insulin sensitivity and reduces inflammatory markers. But here's where it gets even more interesting. In controlled feeding studies, diets rich in monounsaturated fats led to reductions in abdominal fat compared to high carbohydrate diets, even when calories were matched. That tells us something important. It's not just about eating less, it's about hormonal signaling. Olive oil appears to blunt post-meal glucose spikes, and when glucose spikes are smaller, insulin spikes are smaller. Over time, this reduces the chronic insulin elevation that locks fat inside visceral tissue. Some research has also demonstrated improvements in adiponectin levels, a hormone produced by fat cells that actually enhances insulin sensitivity and fat oxidation. higher adiponectin levels are associated with less visceral fat. And perhaps most reassuring of all, populations that have consumed olive oil for generations show lower rates of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. This isn't a fad, it's a pattern observed over decades. But there's a right way to use olive oil if your goal is specifically to burn visceral fat and improve insulin sensitivity. And most people get this part wrong. In the next section, I'll show you exactly how to eat it for maximum metabolic impact. Now this is where strategy matters, because simply adding olive oil on top of an already high-calorie, high-carbohydrate diet will not magically melt visceral fat. The power of extra virgin olive oil comes from how you use it and what you replace with it. First, quality is everything. You want true extra virgin olive oil, cold-pressed, unrefined, ideally stored in a dark glass bottle to protect the polyphenols from light damage. The slight peppery sensation you feel in the back of your throat, that's a sign of oleocanthal, one of the most beneficial anti-inflammatory compounds. If it tastes flat and greasy with no bite, many of those protective compounds may be diminished. Second, timing and pairing make a difference. Olive oil works best when it replaces refined carbohydrates and processed fats, not when it's added on top of them. For example, drizzling olive oil over roasted vegetables instead of buttered bread, using it as a base for salad dressing instead of sugary bottled dressings. Pairing it with protein and fiber helps slow digestion, stabilize blood sugar, and minimize insulin spikes. This is important because the goal isn't just calorie control. The goal is insulin control. When olive oil is consumed with whole foods, vegetables, legumes, fish, eggs, it creates a slower, more controlled metabolic response. That steady response allows your body to remain in a lower insulin state for longer periods, which makes fat burning more accessible. Portion size matters, but not in the way most people think. Research in Mediterranean populations often includes around 1 to 4 tablespoons per day. That may sound like a lot if you've been trained to fear fat. But when it replaces ultra-processed snacks or refined oils, total metabolic load often improves. Another key detail, avoid overheating it excessively. While extra virgin olive oil is relatively stable due to its monounsaturated fat content and antioxidants, extremely high heat can degrade some polyphenols. Using it for low to moderate heat cooking, sautéing, or finishing dishes preserves more of its beneficial compounds. And here's something many overlook. Consistency beats intensity. A single day of olive oil won't transform your metabolism, but daily use, as part of a pattern that reduces refined carbohydrates and stabilizes blood sugar, can gradually resensitize your cells to insulin. In the next section, I'll show you the common mistakes that quietly block visceral fat loss, even when people believe they're eating healthy. Now, this may be the most eye-opening part of our discussion because many people believe they're doing everything right, yet visceral fat refuses to shrink. The first mistake is pairing olive oil with the very foods that spike insulin the most. Pouring olive oil over white pasta, dipping refined bread into it, or adding it to sugary sauces defeats the hormonal advantage. Remember, olive oil helps lower insulin response, but if it's sitting next to a rapid glucose surge, insulin will still rise sharply, and when insulin rises, fat burning pauses. The second mistake is underestimating liquid calories. Sweetened coffee drinks, fruit juices, even natural smoothies can drive insulin higher than people realize. You might add olive oil to your salad at lunch, but if breakfast and snacks are full of fast-digesting carbohydrates, insulin remains elevated most of the day. Visceral fat thrives in that environment. Another overlooked issue is chronic grazing. Frequent snacking, even on healthy foods, keeps insulin repeatedly stimulated. Your body rarely gets the low insulin window it needs to access stored fat. Olive oil supports insulin sensitivity, but if eating occurs every 2 hours, fat-burning opportunities shrink dramatically. There's also the fear of fat trap. Some adults over 50 still restrict fat severely while increasing carbohydrates to compensate. Ironically, that pattern often worsens insulin resistance. When dietary fat is too low, meals digest quickly, blood sugar fluctuates more dramatically, and hunger returns faster. That leads to more frequent eating and more insulin release. Stress is another silent blocker. Elevated cortisol can raise blood sugar independent of food intake. When stress hormones rise, insulin often follows. Even the most metabolically supportive diet struggles under chronic stress conditions. That's why sleep and relaxation are not luxuries. They are metabolic regulators. And finally, inconsistency. Many people try something for a week, don't see immediate dramatic results, and revert to old habits. But visceral fat accumulated over years doesn't disappear overnight. The metabolic environment must shift consistently. Now here's the encouraging part. When you remove these blockers, When olive oil replaces refined carbohydrates, when meals are structured instead of constant grazing, when sleep improves, the body often begins responding faster than expected. But there's one more reason this strategy is especially powerful after age 50, and that's what we'll explore next. Now, if you're over 50, you may feel like your metabolism has permanently slowed down, and in some ways that's true. Hormonal shifts, reduced muscle mass, and lower mitochondrial efficiency all contribute to easier fat storage, especially around the abdomen. But here's where it gets hopeful. The very metabolic changes that make visceral fat more common after 50 also make it more responsive to the right signals. As estrogen declines in women and testosterone gradually lowers in men, the body becomes more prone to storing fat centrally. At the same time, insulin sensitivity often declines with age. That combination, hormonal shifts plus insulin resistance, is why belly fat seems to appear almost out of nowhere. However, research in aging populations shows that improving insulin sensitivity has a disproportionately positive effect in older adults. When insulin levels decrease, the body often releases visceral fat more readily than subcutaneous fat. In other words, the most dangerous fat can be the first to respond when metabolic signaling improves. Extra virgin olive oil fits beautifully into this stage of life because it addresses several age-related issues simultaneously. It supports cardiovascular health, which becomes increasingly important after 50. It reduces systemic inflammation, which naturally rises with age, sometimes referred to as inflammaging. And it protects mitochondrial function, helping cells maintain energy production efficiency. There's also the appetite regulation factor. Healthy fats like olive oil increase satiety hormones such as cholecystokinin, helping you feel satisfied longer. That becomes crucial when muscle mass declines and calorie needs decrease. You need metabolic efficiency, not extreme restriction. Perhaps most importantly, olive oil-based dietary patterns, like the Mediterranean diet, have been associated not only with improved metabolic health, but also with cognitive preservation and longevity in older populations. Japanese and Mediterranean longevity research consistently points toward dietary fat quality, not fat elimination, as a key variable. So rather than fearing fat after 50, the strategy shifts toward choosing the right fats that calm insulin and inflammation instead of provoking them. And now we arrive at the most powerful amplifier of all, the one habit that dramatically multiplies olive oil's visceral fat burning effect. This is the piece that turns steady progress into noticeable transformation. If there's one habit that dramatically accelerates visceral fat loss while improving insulin sensitivity, it's this: strength training. Not endless cardio, not hours on a treadmill, strength training. Here's why this is so powerful. Muscle tissue is the largest glucose disposal site in your body. When you build and preserve muscle, you create a massive reservoir for blood sugar to go, without requiring high levels of insulin. That alone improves insulin sensitivity. After age 50, adults naturally lose muscle in a process called sarcopenia. And when muscle declines, insulin resistance tends to increase. Less muscle means less space to store glucose, so the pancreas compensates by releasing more insulin. And high insulin locks visceral fat in place. But here's the fascinating part. Even modest resistance training, 2 to 3 sessions per week using body weight, resistance bands, or light dumbbells, can significantly improve insulin sensitivity in older adults. Studies consistently show reductions in abdominal fat when strength training is combined with a Mediterranean-style eating pattern rich in extra virgin olive oil. Think about the synergy here. Olive oil lowers inflammation and stabilizes insulin response from the dietary side. Strength training improves glucose uptake and insulin sensitivity from the muscular side. Together, they create a low-insulin, high-fat burning environment. There's also a hormonal advantage. Resistance training stimulates growth hormone and improves testosterone balance in men and women. These hormonal shifts support fat oxidation and protect lean tissue, both critical for reshaping the midsection. And unlike extreme dieting, strength training tells your body to preserve muscle while mobilizing fat. That's important because rapid weight loss without resistance training often reduces muscle mass, which slows metabolism further. You don't need a gym membership. Chair squats, wall push-ups, resistance band rows. Simple movements performed consistently can reactivate dormant muscle fibers and improve metabolic flexibility. When you combine daily extra virgin olive oil as your primary fat source, with consistent strength training, you're addressing visceral fat from 2 powerful angles: nutrition and muscle physiology. That's when belly fat begins to loosen its grip. And that brings us to the bigger picture: what all of this means for your long-term health and vitality. If you take nothing else away from today's discussion, remember this: visceral fat is not just a cosmetic issue. It's a metabolic signal. And the good news is, signals can be changed. By choosing high-quality extra virgin olive oil as your primary dietary fat, you lower inflammation, reduce insulin spikes, and give your cells the flexibility they need to burn stored fat, especially the dangerous fat surrounding your organs. When you pair that with simple, consistent strength training, you create a metabolic environment that works with your body instead of against it. This isn't about extreme dieting. It's not about starving yourself or chasing the latest trend. It's about shifting hormonal messaging in a way that supports fat burning naturally, particularly after 50, when insulin resistance and muscle loss quietly accelerate. The science is clear. Improve insulin sensitivity and visceral fat begins to respond. Support your mitochondria and energy improves. Reduce inflammation and your entire metabolic system becomes more efficient. Small, consistent actions compound. A tablespoon of olive oil, a few strength exercises, better meal structure. Over weeks and months, those choices reshape not just your waistline, but your long-term health trajectory. And that's powerful. Subscribe for more senior health secrets that help you stay strong, lean, and metabolically healthy for life.